Yá'át'ééh, Bene. Good morning, my relatives. It's Mark Charles. Today is Friday, April 25th. I'm here with my second cup of coffee, and just wanted to have a discussion with you about some books I've been reading lately on dealing with distractions. So, over the past several years, but actually the past few months, I've read numerous books on brain health and distractions and how to maintain focus. And I want to have a discussion with you today about some of the things I've been learning, some of the things I've been trying and implementing myself, as I know all of us, or at least most of us, can really benefit from being more focused throughout the day as we deal with the numerous distractions that we get bombarding us, whether it's through the news or through our social media or through our phones, our family, our neighbors, or anything else going on around us. So I want to have a discussion about that today. But before I begin, I want to do like I always do. And I want to acknowledge I'm speaking to you from what my people call Washington. It's the lands of the Piscataway, now called Washington, D.C. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the lands where I'm living. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state how humble I am to be moving, breathing, living on these lands today. So, Yá'át'ééh, my Piscataway relatives. So before we jump into my discussion on distraction, I want to talk about a few things. I don't know if many of you know, but I've been traveling a lot these past few weeks. My sister and her fiance got married this weekend, and they were married in Las Vegas on Sunday morning. And so my daughter and I flew out there and were there for the ceremony on Sunday. And then we took a red eye home Sunday night. It was actually the end of both of our daughters' spring breaks. And so we had to get back for school. And so we flew a red eye coming back, left Las Vegas around 11 o'clock at night and got into DC about 9 in the morning, slept that day. And then my daughter Shandine went to school. She's a senior this year, and she went to school that morning. And then that afternoon, we actually went up to Baltimore and flew from Baltimore to Boston. And so we were in Boston on just outside of Boston on Wednesday. And we were there because, and I'm really thrilled to announce this, my daughter was accepted and committed to go to Worcester Polytechnic Institute, WPI, in their aerospace engineering program. And she will be a freshman there next year. And she was deciding between that school and the University of Hawaii. And as beautiful as Hawaii is, and as much as I would love to have her be among the indigenous peoples of Hawaii there, it was a long ways away. And their aerospace engineering program there is much newer. And so it wasn't quite as established as we had hoped, although the campus is beautiful. And of course, everything else about Hawaii would be fantastic. But the distance and as well as the program wasn't quite as established as we had hoped or wanted. WPI was a great fit. We went there on Wednesday and had kind of, not an orientation, but kind of, it was a accepted students day. And so they had programming for the students. You could sit in on different department introductions, and you could tour the campus, and you could hear about the different programs on the campus and how the school works. And the longer we were there, the more we were there on Wednesday, the more excited we were about what a great school that would be for Shandine to be at. So I'm thrilled. This is now our second child who's studying aerospace engineering, and she will be starting at Worcester. And I'm probably saying that wrong. It's spelled Worcester. It's spelled like Worcester, but it's pronounced Worcester or Worcester. The best way we could find to pronounce it was a pizza place in the city called Worcester Pizza. So that's not the correct spelling, but it is the correct pronunciation. It's Worcester, and then that restaurant is Pizza and Restaurant. But obviously that's how you pronounce the name. It's very New England, very kind of Northeastern. The one downside I did see to the school was that, like many things in the Northeast, they love Dunkin' Donuts up there. And I believe Dunkin' Donuts is a northeastern established company, and so I even noticed it here in DC. There's a lot of Dunkin' Donuts here, and people line up for it, in the airports and other places. And I'm like, it's not good coffee. It's Dunkin' Donuts coffee. It's not, it's not gourmet coffee, at least in my opinion. And so I was a little disappointed that WPI runs on Dunkin', but there are other numerous coffee shops around the campus, both the campus and the area in Worcester. And so, yeah, but that's one of the minor downsides. But other than that, it was a great campus. And just a little fun note: when we were flying home, we were in the Boston airport, and they had a setup where, because the Boston Marathon literally happened, I think it was on Monday, and we were there, and so they had a little stand where you could go and you could take a picture of yourself like you were running the Boston Marathon. And so this is one of the pictures that we took. You can see the stand there. They have the big blackboard behind you. So I cropped this picture and I got this shot here. Of course, this is just a lot of fun to take the picture. So my daughter was taking my picture. I'm kind of dancing around behind this ribbon, and we're having some fun taking the picture. And this woman comes up and she sees my daughter taking my picture and says, "Oh, can you take my picture as well?" And we said, "Sure." She said, "I actually just ran the Boston Marathon on Monday." And so I, of course, was very humbled because this woman just ran the marathon. She was from Ireland, and so it's fun to meet her and to ask her a little bit about the race. But yeah, this was a fun picture that we took when we were in the airport flying home from Boston. That was Wednesday evening. So anyway, I'm back in DC. I'm home for about a month before I travel up to Alaska, and I'll be doing some coaching with a pastor I work with up there in Alaska at the end of the month. But I'm home for a month, and I'm hoping to get on a really good schedule with my Second Cups of Coffee, as well as my Patreon, as well as get some good writing and progress worked on my books and the presentations I'm working on, including my Common Memory Tour. And I would love to get your input, especially if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, where I'm live streaming this, but you can also see the video on YouTube. My assistant and I are playing with a few designs. As you know, I'm on this Common Memory Tour, and we've been doing some fundraising for it and trying to get people to help cover some of my expenses, as I'm really working on trying to protest what the Trump administration is doing, but I'm trying to do it very strategically. And so instead of just protesting Donald Trump, I'm talking about common memory, and I'm giving a talk called, the talk is called Christian Nationalism, Creation Stories, and Corn. And it deals with content from the book I wrote and the two books I'm working on. The book I wrote, obviously, is Unsettling Truths. That's where the Christian nationalism piece comes in. Creation Stories comes with content for the book I'm currently writing called Decolonizing Faith. And Corn comes from the book I'm researching and getting ready to write, which I'm going to call Decolonizing Health. And so we've been giving these presentations. I was just in Michigan a few weeks ago and gave two presentations, that presentation twice up there. And I'm really excited about the response we're getting from it and how the presentation is coming together, and just the way it's giving me a chance to talk, not just protesting what's going on currently politically in our nation, but to really lay out a vision. Again, the quote I use all the time is, where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, you have to first create common memory. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not just trying to add to the chaos or to the screaming or to the yelling or to make sure my voice is heard above the screaming. I want to just not only protest, but lay out a vision of what would it look like for our nation to have a common memory. What would it look like for us to have healthier relationships across racial and other divisive lines that we've had throughout our history, by not ignoring our past or canceling people, but by really understanding and wrestling with the common memory we have as a nation together. And so you can read more about that. I posted the video or the link to my GoFundMe if you'd like to support that. But what I would love to get your input on is we are deciding on two different designs right now, and we like them both, but I love to get your input on there. So I'm going to show you briefly the two designs that we're looking at. This is the first one that we're looking at. As you can see, it's a darker theme. It has some different photos of me speaking. Obviously, as we do the tour more, we'll get more photos and can incorporate them in. And then we have that information there. And then the other graphic we're working with, oh, that's the wrong one, is this one here. It's a lighter color. We like that kind of splash gold paint in the background. It almost looks like corn. Almost looks like an ear or two of corn. And this is, we like this one, but I would love to get your input. Feel free to leave a comment or say something in the comments of this video and let me know what you think of one or both of these two graphics and which one you think would be good for us to use more prominently as we continue to promote the Common Memory Tour that I am on. And that brings me to the next point I want to make, which is this Sunday on my Patreon. So you can follow my work more closely on the subscription site Patreon. And on my Patreon site, I go deeper into some of the content that I discuss. I have different things that are available every month, depending on the tier that you subscribe to. And for people who are subscribed to the Ask Questions tier and above, I have a monthly Q&A, and usually during the month I try to incorporate in people who are guests on my podcast to join the Q&A. And we've typically done that right after the podcast, but that's been a little harder to do because that's normally in the middle of the day and it's harder for people to join. And so we haven't been able to get a very good crowd for that. And so we decided this month to invite the guests back for my evening Q&A that I have once a month. And so if you would like to join myself, and if you remember last week, I had a conversation with Matt Mikalatos, who is doing some very strategic protesting regarding Donald Trump's immigration policies. He and I are going to be on my Q&A this Sunday, April 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's a Zoom call, and so people who are subscribed to the Ask Questions tier or above of my Patreon will get an invitation to that. They'll get the Zoom link, and they can join that Q&A. Even if you just subscribe for the 1 month, you can join that Q&A as well as get all of the archive content for that tier, the Ask Questions tier. You can view other Q&As I've had from the past several years. I've been doing this for about 3 years now. And so there's many other guests that we have Q&As on there, including Jamar Tisby and who else do we have? Leroy Barber, Sing-Chan Ra, many other people we've had up there. So anyway, that's a great place if you like to join the discussion and have a Q&A with myself and Matt this coming Sunday. Let me see who's on with me this morning. I know I saw a few people on the chat. James, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining this morning. It's good to have you. Steve, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining. Thank you for being here. You like the first one better, the darker one. Okay, thanks for that feedback. I appreciate that, Steve. And thank you for being on with me. George, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining this morning. It's good to have you here from the West Coast. It's a bit earlier there. Well, it's almost noon here, so it's a bit after 8 o'clock, going on 9 out on the West Coast. But it's great to have you here. And thank you for joining me this morning. I hope all of you have your favorite morning beverage, because I want to talk for a few moments about dealing with distractions, or even more proactively about what things can we do to work on our mental focus. And over the past several years, I've read numerous books, but I've read a lot recently. I'm just going to show you some of the books I've read about mental focus. One of the first books that I read was almost a few years ago. It was by Cal Newport. It was called Deep Work. and it's rules for focused success in a distracted world. This book is really research driven. It's very insightful, but it's a much more of an academic type read. A few other books. I just read another book just less than a month ago. It had a lot of the same lessons in it. It was called Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. And this was much more of a narrative and a story-based book with some. It was a much faster read than the Deep Work book. They were both excellent books, but Stolen Focus was a bit more of a narrative style. So depending on the way you like to read and like to learn, those are two really good books that I've read, or I just read Stolen Focus a few weeks ago, and Deep Work I read a couple of years ago, I think. I've also read this book by Nir Eyal called Indistractable. And then I read, I'm just starting this book right now. I literally started it today, Think Again by Adam Grant. I know I'm going to have a few good thoughts on that book as well. I've also read The Anxious Generation. I've begun reading Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which is a very well-selling book and has a lot of thoughts about what social media is doing to us, especially the anxiety levels of our children. And then I read this book also within the past couple weeks by Dale Bredesen called The Ageless Brain. And The Ageless Brain is really about brain health. And one of the points that he makes in that book is we have a lot of discussion now about longevity and how can you expand your lifespan and how can you live longer and be healthier. But he says, but if you're living longer, but you're not taking care of your brain, there's not a whole lot of point to living longer, because you really want to be mentally capable. If your body is capable, you want your brain to be just as capable. So he talks very specifically about what we can do for brain health. And a lot of the stuff that we can do for our overall physical health is the same things we can do for our brain health, whether it's sleeping well, exercising regularly, eating healthy, less processed, more natural foods, and then also just continuing to work our brain by continuing to expose it to new ideas and new thoughts and thinking. And I found that last book I talked about, The Ageless Brain, a very beneficial book, and also a very challenging book to read. But I want to talk for a little bit today about more of the content from this Deep Work book as well as from this Stolen Focus book. And one of the things that I want to bring up from these two books, and one of the reasons I read these books and I wrestle with these things is because I've been self-employed now for 20 years, 25 years. I've worked from home. I've had a home office for a long time. And when you work alone and you don't have kind of an institution that's pushing you, or a boss that's pressuring you, or other demands that are kind of really keeping you focused, you really find it's very easy to get distracted. And finding the time to do the really deep work or the really focused work that you want to do is a challenge. As well as finding time to separate from work. One of the challenges, and I've said this before about writing books, and I experienced this when I was writing Unsettling Truth. I experience it now when I'm writing Decolonizing Faith. It's from the moment you decide to write the book, you really don't have any natural mental breaks, right? Because you're not going into an office, you're not writing for 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day. It's something you do when you find the time to write, when you're in a mental space to write, when you have the focus and the clarity to write. Sometimes it works for some people to keep a really focused schedule of writing. I found for me, I have to do it a little more when I'm a bit inspired, but I have to actually create the space for that inspiration to come. But the biggest challenge for me with writing a book is, for as long as until you turn in the manuscript, it's really hard to know how to take a break, because every minute of every day, there's always this thought in the back of your head that says, I could, or even I should be writing right now. And so it's really hard because there's not a defined time as to how do you turn that off. And because, the more we overwork, the more that we overextend ourselves, the harder it is to focus when we do work. And so anyway, the two books, both the Deep Work book and the Still in Focus book, one of the things that they talk a lot about is how our modern day society is very distracting, whether it's the constant notifications from our social media, whether it's text messages or phone calls, right? The fact that we carry around these phones, these devices that allow people and companies and institutions and organizations to interrupt us at any given time, really has eroded a lot of our ability to focus. And in the book Stolen Focus, Johann Hari, he starts with a story where he actually kind of secludes himself. He doesn't go off into the middle of nature, but he goes into a very small town, and he gets rid of his smartphone, only takes an old, just an old flip phone, that all you can do is make phone calls on it. He has no internet access, and he goes to just try and decompress so he can begin writing and focusing. And he realized he wants to be more focused, and he kind of goes through that experiment. And that, as I was reading that book, that reminded me of when my wife and our son and I were living back in Arizona, especially when we were living in the Hogan. For 3 years, we lived in this Hogan. We were 6 miles off the nearest paved road on a dirt road. There was no running water. There was no electricity. Smartphones were not something you used for entertainment at that point. You couldn't pull up your social media on your smartphone. You couldn't watch videos or movies on your smartphone. This was the early 2000s. It was a communication device, and you could very slowly connect it to the internet with your laptop by tethering it to your laptop, but you could not do any major gaming or streaming or anything like that. And so it was not yet an entertainment device. It was a way to do some work, which is what I used it for primarily. But I remember when we were living there in that Hogan, and I would travel. I was still not traveling a lot, but maybe once every few months, every month or two, I was traveling somewhere. Both I was working back then as a computer consultant, and sometimes I would take 4 to 6 week gigs in different cities around the country, and I would travel out and then come back. Other times I would travel to speak somewhere or to do something else, or we would go visit family or friends around the country. And I remember every time we came back to the res, and especially if I'd been in a large city like San Francisco or Chicago or Los Angeles, right? Even here in DC, you walk outside, you hear sirens, you hear tractors, you hear cranes, you hear construction, you hear jackhammers, you hear cars honking, right? There's this constant kind of buzz of noise going on behind the scene. Even when you're inside in a hotel, you'll hear cars honking outside, or the sound of a fender bender or something else, or the yelling or the screaming of people going on as tensions are rising around the city, or people honking their horns, and it kind of invades the space. And I remember I would get back to the Hogan, and especially I would notice it the first night when I would be lying in bed, and my ears would literally just ring because it was so unbelievably quiet. My ears would ring because of the silence. And I began to really look forward to coming back to the reservation. And I really looked forward even to that first day, that first night back, of sitting in the Hogan or lying in bed or sitting outside with no electricity and looking at the stars up in the sky and just letting my ears ring with the silence that we were surrounded by. And that's where I began my writing, was living in that Hogan. That's where I began my writing, was living in the Hogan. I wasn't writing books back then. I was writing a blog. That's where I started writing my blog called Reflections from the Hogan, which is where I started kind of wrestling with the injustice and the doctrine of discovery and all those things. And if you go back onto my blog, Reflections from the Hogan, you'll see some of those early articles, that many of those were written sitting in that Hogan, with the silence just all around me. And yeah, I when I contrast that now with where we live in DC, and not only with the noise that we're surrounded by, so much that a lot of times when I'm walking around the city, and I walk a lot around the city, many times I'll have my noise canceling earphones in, not even with listening to music, but just have them in to cancel the noise of the sirens going by and the cars honking across the street. And right, you have to be very aware when you're walking because you can't hear as well. But there's just so much noise with the construction going on, and especially when fire trucks and ambulances go by, and it really shakes your eardrums. And yeah, so we have that, but now today our cell phones are constantly buzzing and ringing, and people are texting, and right, we get notifications all the time. And over the years I've gotten better about turning off all those notifications and not using it for social media as much. I've actually been tracking how much I use it every day for social media to really try to keep that time down and use it much more as a tool instead of as entertainment. But yeah, it really disrupts us. And these two books, Stolen Focus and Deep Work, one of the things, and I forget which book talked about it the most, but they both mentioned it, was the benefit, not only for productivity, but even for our own mental health, of having 60 to 90 minute segments of our day where we are not distracted, we are completely focused, and we can just allow ourselves to get lost in the thing that we're working on. Now, that's very difficult to do when you're sitting at an internet-connected computer, right? Because researching something that you want to write about can quickly turn into a rabbit trail of going down, and you end up doom scrolling on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, right? And that can happen in an instant. And so it's almost, but there, and Johann Hari talks about this more specifically in the book. Well, they both talk about it, but he talks about how, actually looking at the psychological side, where people feel more satisfied when we have those types of work sessions, when we literally have that mental focus where we're doing something that's not only productive, but we're doing something that is meaningful to us, that is challenging to us, and that we're able to focus on. And so even if you're sitting and you're focusing and your phone vibrates and you got a text message, and even if you look at the text message and then decide to ignore it, you still focus there and then you go back. It still is a distraction. And so he talks a lot about the importance of even just turning off notifications, even turning off the phones, and just allowing ourselves to, for that time, getting lost in that work and allowing ourselves to really focus on just being productive. And the Deep Work book by Cal Newport talked about the same thing, and it mentioned the same thing. And I remember actually going back and reading the book a second time because I wanted to understand that concept a little bit better. And then I also found it in the book Lost Focus by Johann Hari, where he talked about the same thing. I listened to it there a couple of times as well. But it was so motivating for me, because that's one of the things I get the most frustrated with is, and my challenge is, and you have to know your personality in this too, right? Introverts can focus really well when they're alone, because their brain processes things internally, and so being alone can help them to focus. For myself, I'm an extrovert, and my wife is a strong introvert. I'm a strong extrovert. Most people would define introversion versus extroversion as how, where do you get your energy? Do you get your energy from thinking, or from being alone, or from being with other people? I would actually define it a bit more specifically and say introversion versus extroversion is not about where you get your energy. It's about how do you process information. Do you process it internally in your head or do you process it externally? So introverts, based on my experience, right, one of the reasons why it's tiring to be in public or in a crowd is because they are processing everything in their head before they say it. So they're thinking, their brain is working really hard, so it's tiring them out because they're processing everything before they say it. For me, when I'm in a crowd, I don't process things internally first. I process them externally. And so when I go out and I'm in a public space where I'm sitting down with friends or talking with colleagues and I'm getting ideas out in front of me, that's actually really refreshing. It's helping me sort through things. Like I find one of my most productive times of my entire life is when I'm flying home from a work trip where I've had almost an overload of conversations and presentations and discussions and experiences and all these things. And my brain is literally just bursting with all of this information. And I'm sitting on the plane feverishly writing ideas down or typing up notes on something and trying to I want to make sure I capture this, because after I get home and I've been home working in my office or walking around the city the way I do and having much more alone time, I find my focus and my energy is much more dampened than it is when I'm out on the road or when I'm coming home from being on a trip. So I really work hard when I fly home to try and capture all of them. Like my creativity is at its height when I'm flying home because I have all these ideas, all these thoughts, all the things going on in my mind. I'm trying to capture them before they kind of get squashed with the more isolated professional life I have here in DC. And so anyway, so one of the things that I've been working on doing after rereading the book Deep Work by Cal Newport and reading the book by Johann Hari on focus is I've actually been trying to, how would I say this? Trying to work myself up for at least one, if not two, 90-minute uninterrupted, not distracted work sessions a day. And if I can have even just one of those, and better yet, two, if I can have one in the late morning and one in the mid to late afternoon, then that's a successful day. That's a great day. And I found what I'll do in the morning is I do this, and I've been more intentional about this, is after I drop my daughters off at school, and then I walk to an outdoor workspace where I can go to, and I love sitting outdoors. And I will go and sit there, and I will begin to whether it's doing some journaling or whether it's doing some verbal processing, like just speaking into a microphone or recording myself or transcribing some stuff, getting my thoughts about the day, what I want to work on, what I want to focus on, outlining some ideas, kind of exploring some different things, or even calling someone and having a phone call, having a conversation with someone, and getting my brain into a space where I'm thinking about what I want to work on that morning or that afternoon. And then I walk home. I do that for about a half hour to 45 minutes, and then I walk home. Usually at that point, I eat some breakfast, grab my second cup of coffee, and then I try to sit down and do 60 to 90 minutes of really focused work. Turning off my cell phone, telling my wife, "Hey, if someone texts, I'm not going to get it immediately because I've turned off my notifications. I'm going to try and focus for the next hour and a half," and allowing myself to really focus on that. And what I'm finding is that does not only allow me to be more productive in my work, but I actually do feel a much deeper sense of satisfaction. And they talk about this more strongly in the book than I'm talking about it here, but they talk about one of the reasons why many people have, why the mental health of Western culture is deteriorating so rapidly, is because of how distracted we are and how limited our ability or even our opportunity is to focus on things we are passionate about, that we are challenged by, and that are meaningful to us. And because we're not able to focus on those things, because we're trying to do so many things at once, we're not getting near the level of not just that was a good day's work, but the deeper mental, emotional satisfaction of knowing that we're working on something that's meaningful, that's important, and that is challenging to us, that is actually making us think and learn and grapple with new ideas and new thoughts and new concepts, and kind of expanding ourselves mentally in that way. When I talk about it, getting into the zone. I forget what word Johan Hari used, but I talk about getting into the zone, and it will happen for me sometimes when I'm speaking, right? And I've done this more recently. I've been trying to speak less from my slides and more just telling stories and working from an outline, because what that does is it allows me to get into the zone more of where I'm really engaged, connect with the audience, as well as talking about things I'm passionate about and that I'm excited about. And I can very much kind of lose myself in the midst of that. Like I'm not even quite sure what I'm going to say next, but I know it's going to be something that is very meaningful. And it's harder to do that when I'm working off of slides as much, because then I'm really going through even just kind of a mental script. And so I'm trying to find a way of, and my wife has noticed that in me several times. She'll see me speaking, and when I come down off the stage, she'll say, "You got into the zone on that presentation." I'm like, yeah, I did. Like, it felt really, really good. And I'm trying to figure out how do I do that with my workday? How do I get myself into that same mental space? Because when I have those moments, when I get into that zone, I feel this deep, deep sense of satisfaction. And so I highly recommend both of these books that I've read. All the ones I showed you before, I recommend reading them. The two best ones were the Johan Hari on Stolen Focus, and then the Deep Work by Cal Newport. I also would recommend this one, The Ageless Brain. Again, what can we do to keep our brain healthy? How do we need to eat? How do we need to exercise? How do we need to sleep? What do we need to do mentally to make sure that as we're taking care of our bodies, we're also taking care of our brains, so that we have the mental capacity to be engaged. Even as we're trying so hard to get our bodies into shape, we need to make sure we keep our brain in shape as well. So those are some thoughts I just wanted to share with you, my relatives. And the other point I want to make on this, and this isn't coming necessarily from the books I've read, but from other things I've read before on mental health, is we need to remember, right? And this is the problem with the 24-hour news cycle, and not only with the fact that you can turn on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC and get news stories from around the globe, 24 hours a day, but it's in our social media as well. One of the books I've been reading I've also been reading this book, Disarming the Narcissist, and really trying to go even deeper into what does it mean to live with a narcissist. Not that I have a narcissist in my immediate family, but again, Donald Trump demonstrates many of the symptoms of a classic narcissist. I obviously can't diagnose him remotely. I'm not even a psychologist, but when I look at what a narcissist is and what do they struggle with, what are their symptoms, I see many of those symptoms in Donald Trump. the way they create chaos and they create problems that only they can solve, and they work hard to keep themselves in the middle of stuff. And I've talked before about what does it mean to live with a narcissist, because as a nation, I would argue we are living with a narcissist, and how do we maintain our own mental health in the midst of all of that? And on top of that, we have an ad-driven news cycle and click-driven social media. And so, right, the news agencies love this because Trump says outrageous things on an hourly basis. And this is all clickbait that all of these news agencies, not all of them, but most of them, are using to get us to click on their story, to read their perspective. And it's in a way to make us angry or to make us upset, so that we'll click on it and then we'll share it and we'll yell and scream about it with everybody else. And one of the things, and I forget exactly where I read this, but it's been my experience, is emotionally, a few weeks ago, there was a fire in our neighborhood, and 2 families lost their homes. One of the families was a family we knew as well, and it was thankfully no one was killed in the fire, but it happened right in our neighborhood. We knew the family that was affected by it. Many people came around that family to help them, whether it was with financial support or cooking meals or doing other things, just checking in on them, making sure they're being okay. And that's appropriate, right? When there's a tragedy in your world, we want to be able to respond to it and to be emotionally and physically and mentally present for the people who we care about and whose lives are being affected by these things. The problem is we have limited capacity to do that. And the challenge with the 24-hour news cycle is we are hearing not just about fires, but about wars and tragedies and injustice and things from around the globe. And we're not just hearing the stats and the data, we're seeing interviews and photos of the people. And right, this is what makes it clickbait, right? It's the emotional connection, which we want, but also it gets to a point where it absolutely overwhelms us. And we don't have emotional capacity for a 24-hour news cycle where we're getting these types of stories on a minute by minute and hour by hour, daily basis. And this is what tends just to cause us to shut down emotionally. And so again, one of the things, and right now with all of the chaos going on by the Trump administration, whether it's the firings and rehirings and the budget cuts and everything that DOGE is doing, or the executive orders that go out, or the attacks on lawyers, or the attacks on education, or the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or all these things, this chaotic craziness that's going on. All of this takes a massive emotional amount of energy for us to process before we just begin shutting down. And so I found in these past few months, especially since Trump's been inaugurated, and this is true even before then, but I need to be very selective about how much news I expose myself to. I need to be very selective. And I especially need to avoid being exposed to news on my social media. Because that's where you can start just doom scrolling and just feeling yourself getting angrier and angrier. I work very hard, and I've talked about this before, to hunt my news instead of being fed my news. And so, if you're getting your news from your social media, I would highly recommend stop that practice, because the social media is trying to get you to click. They're trying to make you angry or excited or whatever else, and they do not care about your mental health. And so do not get your news from your social media. I don't even get my news from turning on the TV or turning on the radio. I actually work to intentionally go to news websites and read what's on their websites or look up stories. If someone sends me a story, and again, whenever someone shares a story, not ever, but most of the times when they share stories, they share the CNN or the MSNBC or the Fox News version of the story, which is meant to it's meant to it's clickbait, it's propaganda. And so if someone sends me something that's from Fox News or from CNN, frequently I will Google that. And I will Google like AP News, whatever the headline was, or whatever the content of the story was, or NPR, or PBS, or one of them. And no news agency is completely neutral. But what are the agencies that try to do a better job of not just being propaganda machines? And I try very hard to go out and search my news that way. So I'm working very hard at how do I stay on top of the headlines so I'm aware of what's going on, but I'm not allowing that 24-hour news cycle or the social media algorithms to intrude into my day and into my own emotional space in a way that would be detrimental to both my productivity as well as my own mental and personal well-being. And so I want to encourage all of you to do something. You don't have to do what I do, but do something intentional to not give the control of your mental and emotional health to corporations that are all about making money, or to narcissists that are all about making themselves the center of your attention and your focus. And so I highly encourage all of you, my relatives, to work hard to not only not get distracted, but to make sure that you create space and protect yourself from the numerous intrusions and things that come at us on a minute by minute and hourly basis in our world through our phones and through social media and everything else. But yeah, so I just want to share some of these thoughts with you. I'm going to look at my comments and see who is on still and other thoughts people may have. But I appreciate everyone who's on here. I do go through the comments usually and read them after we're over if I don't have time to do it all when I'm on live. But I appreciate all of you. I hope you have found this helpful. And thank you so much for joining me today for my second cup of coffee. Again, on Sunday, this coming Sunday, the 27th, at 8 o'clock Eastern time, I will have my Patreon Q&A and Matt Mikalatos. I'm actually sharing Matt's Substack here. I had him on my second cup of coffee last week talking about protesting Trump's immigration policies strategically. And so he and I will be having a Q&A on my Patreon site, the Ask Questions tier, this Sunday, April 27th at 8 p.m. I invite you to join me for that. If you are interested in following and learning more about my Common Memory Tour, I'm going to share both of these two slides here. I am currently on this Common Memory Tour where I'm going around the country talking about Christian nationalism, creation stories, and corn, and really challenging our nation, not just to scream and yell and be divisive towards each other, but to work on building a healthier community through creating a more accurate common memory. And if you would like to learn more about that tour, as well as support that financially, you can do that on my website right there. And then the last thing let me share the Patreon link with you as well. If you would like to sign up for my Patreon to join the Q&A this coming Sunday, that you can get that there. But my relatives, I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine is. But walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Yá'át'ééh and go on that.